Good afternoon or good morning or whatever. Today we're teaching today's daf yomi live from Catania, from the mountain overlooking Mount Etna, from Catania, Sicily. And we start the new tractate called Nedarim. What a beautiful tractate. And so says the Mishnah. Our Mishnah, as in the context that we're going to be discussing, is that there are two types of a neder is a vow. There are two types of vows. There's what's called a nidre hektish, and that allows you to consecrate something to the temple or an animal to bring it on the altar. And there's what's called nidre isur. This is something where you're able to take a vow to prohibit something upon yourself. Like you say, for example, the fruit of this country or this person is prohibited to me for 30 days or forever. So our tractate will deal primarily with nidre isur, with vows of a prohibition. Now, you can that's a background. I'm in the lobby of the hotel. A neder can be applicable in one of three ways. First of all, the main aspect of the neder is if a person says, this thing is asur, this thing is prohibited upon me, or davar ze alai korban, or this something is prohibited to me like a sacrifice. So, i.e., just like a sacrifice is prohibited because it's so holy, so too this object could be prohibited to me. And the second thing is it can be prohibited through what's called a kinoi. You don't have to use the word neder. You could just use a word that's similar to a neder. That instead of saying the word korban, you use a synonym like a konem or koneach or kones. This is what's called a kinoi for the korban. And the third way in which this neder can take effect is what's called a yad of a neder. A yad, or literally a handle, that is basically where you don't say the complete neder, but you begin you start to say the formulation of the oath and you don't complete it. You like shorthand. It's like, for example, instead of saying, how are you doing? You say, what's up? You know what I'm saying? So you say a shorthand. And so therefore it's as though the rabbis view it as though you said the entire neder completely. So you'll join us for the daf. You can pull it up on your phone. Here we go. We're doing Nedarim daf phase, Nedarim 2. Yeah. So we're in the middle of the shir. So Nedarim daf phase. Click on what shir or pull it up on your phone. Nedarim daf phase. So now we're going to start the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Kol kinoi nedarim. Every time you use this kinoi of a neder. So we just said, what's a kinoi? A kinoi is where you don't say this thing is prohibited to being like a korban, but you use a synonym for a korban. Like, for example, konem, konech. All of these things will take effect. But the Mishnah then continues and says, Kol kinoi nedarim, kinedarim, or like nedarim, v'charamim. And a cherem, you might remember that word from kol nidre, a kinoi of a cherem will take effect like a cherem. This is a synonym for a neder. And the third thing is shavuos kishavuos. A oath will take effect like a shavuo, like another oath. And nazirus kinazirus. And then a Nazarite vow will take effect like a Nazarite vow. So then the Mishnah goes into discussing what is a yad. We said a yad is something which is like where you don't say the full neder, you just say a portion of it. So the Mishnah explains that Omer lechavero, somebody says to his friend, Mudrani mimcha, Mufreshani mimcha, Miruchakani mimcha. You say to your friend, I am separated from you. I'm Mudrani. I'm basically, there's a vow for me upon you, but you don't say the full thing, or you say I'm separated or I'm distant from you. Shani ocha, that anything that I'll eat from you, shani toim ocha, or I'll taste from you, meaning all these things are prohibited, asur. That under all those circumstances, or if he says these words, or if he says this word asur, even though he doesn't say the explicit expression that it's prohibited, it's going to be prohibited for him to taste or eat from his friend's food because he has taken that vow. Let's say he uses the word menuda anilcha. Menuda is an expression of excommunication. Let's say he uses that expression. So then Rabbi Akiva was thinking that we should be strict about it under these circumstances. So that's the word of Menuda Ani Lecha. Rabbi Akiva thought that that would also be considered a yad. Hold on. Yeah, it's such a geschmack that we're studying here with Isaac and Simon and Shia in Catania, and also with people on Zoom. So now we start Daf Beis Amud Beis. So the Gemara Nedarim has very, very short dafim, and the reason is because there's no Rashi. The printed Rashi for Nedarim is actually not Rashi, and so the main commentary, the commentary of record, so to speak, for Nedarim is the Ran, and the Ran is from Girondi, which is close to Sicily, and so that the Ran, however, is very wordy, and so therefore the Ran takes up a lot of the daf, and so therefore the dafim are much shorter. So we'll be able to get through most dafim, but that doesn't mean that it's easier. Nedarim is a very, very difficult tractate because we don't think like that. We're not living in a world where we, generally speaking, take vows. Like, so it's conceptually, it's much more difficult for us to understand. So the Gemara says, Kol kinoi nedarim k'nedarim, so that our Mishnah had started off by saying all synonyms for vows are going to have the effect of vows. So the Gemara asks the question, first of all, like stylistically, Maishna Gabi Nazir, then the Mishnah goes to say not only the synonyms of Nedarim are like Nedarim, but also the synonyms of Charamim and Shvuos and Naziros. And the Gemara asks the question, how come in Mesechas Nazir, where you have a parallel Mishnah where we talk about a Nazirite, Maishna Gabi Nazir, the Lo Katani Lulakul, it doesn't list all of them. It just says with respect to Nazir, as the Ran tells us, it just says Kol Kinoi Naziros are like Naziros. So, by the way, the Nedarim and Nazir are really go together. They're two of what's called the four Mesechtos Mishunos, that the tractates are using completely different language. So you'll see in many examples of Nedarim having its own special language. So the Gemara is asking a stylistic question. Why by Nazir does it just use the expression of a Nazir, but by Neder, it goes in to say Kol Kino Nedarim, and lists a Cherem, a Shvua, and a Nazirite. So the Gemara says, Ma'ishna Gabi Nazir Lo Katani Lulakulu, Ma'ishna Gabi Nedarim Katani Lulakulu. What's the difference between Neder and Nazir? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. The Neder Shvua Ksive Gabi Adadi. In the Torah, the neder, the concept of a vow, is listed with the concept of an oath, because it says in the pasuk, in Bamidbar chapter 30, verse 3, Ki Yidor Neder Hashem, O Yishava Shvua, when you take a vow to God or you take an oath. Tani Tartin. And so therefore, since the neder is written with a shvua, the verse states Kol Neder, and then goes straight into Kol Shavua, Kol Kinoi Shvua Keshvua. And so therefore, that's the reason why it says Kol Kinoi Nedarim K'nedarim, and then Shvuos Keshvuos, and it has to list it, whereas by Nazir it doesn't list it. Gemara says, and given the Tani Tartan, since we wrote both of them, since we wrote the one by Nedarim, and since we wrote the one by Shavuos, Tani L'Kulu, therefore it also lists the other ones of Charamim and Naziros. The Gemara says, V'lisnei Kinoi Shavuos Basar Nedarim. Well, if that's the case, that the whole reason why we're listing all four is because Nedarim and Shavuos are written together, then if that's the case, we should write Shavuos. It should say Kol Kinoi Nedarim K'nedarim, and then Kol Kinoi Shavuos K'Shavuos. Why does it go from Nedarim to Charamim, and then to Shavuos, and then to Nazir? It should have just done Nedarim and Shavuos together. So the Gemara gives an answer to that. Gemara says, Aidi de Tani Nedarim, the Mitzar Chavtzei Alai, Tani Nami Charamim, the Mitzar Chavtzei Aleha. So the Gemara says, well, now we're going to say, since the Mishnah mentions vows, so since the Mishnah mentions vows, which are, how does a vow happen? A vow happens by taking an object and saying the object is prohibited upon you. And so that's also how a cherem works. The cherem works that it takes the object and the cherem becomes prohibited upon you. So for this reason, the neder and the cherem are very similar conceptually. The shavua is different because when it comes to the shvua, you yourself are becoming prohibited upon the object. It's not that the object is being prohibited upon you, but you yourself are becoming prohibited upon the object. This is the classic distinction between the gavra or the chefza. What's the item that's becoming prohibited? That the neder is about the chefza, the object being prohibited, and the shvua is about the gavra, the person themselves being prohibited. And so therefore, the dharma is what's called an isur chefza, and the oath is what's called Shavu is what's called an Itzer Gavra. So there are several distinctions that the commentaries discuss as arising as a result of this distinction between them. So for example, one distinction is that a neder will take effect on a dvar mitzvah just like on a dvar reshus, whereas a shvua will not take effect if it was on a mitzvah. That's one example. And another thing is the shvua will take effect on whether, even if it's something that's intangible, whereas a neder will only take effect upon something that's tangible. So that's the classic, those are two of the classic distinctions. So the Gemara says, well, we're still not happy with the order of the Mishnah because Pasach b'kinuyin, kol kinyan nedarim. We start by discussing all the synonyms of a neder, and then from there we go on Mifaresh yados, and then it goes on to doesn't tell us what's a kinoi of a neder. It just says all the kinoim of the nedarim are considered like nedarim, and then it goes on to tell us what is a yad. What is a yad? It goes on to explain the concept of a yad. So, for example, ha'omer lechavero mudar ani mimcha. If somebody says to his friend that this is an example of a yad, you just do the abbreviated version. Mudar ani mimcha. I'm separated from you. And so that's one thing. Why does it not go into discussing the kinuyim? It goes into discussing the yados. And furthermore, the su yados inchi. The inchi means to forget, and it's a strange lashon, strange formulation, which really appears in the Dharma. Where he says it's basically saying, why did the Tana forgot to tell us the law of yados at all? It starts talking about the laws of kinuyim, and then goes straight into the laws, and then starts explaining the laws of yados, but it doesn't tell us the actual laws. It never told us about the concept of the yados to begin with. So why does it go straight? He forgot to tell us about the whole concept of the yados. It starts in, I'll use some Latin here, because I'm in Sicily. It starts in medias res. It starts right in the middle of things. So the Gemara gives an answer. The Gemara says, Ayri bahon. The Gemara says, okay, really the Mishnah was discussing yados. It was discussing it. The Mishnah was missing some words. We're missing some words from the Mishnah. This is how we have to read the Mishnah. Kol kinuye nedarim kinedarim. All the kinuyim of vows are like vows. V'yados nedarim kinedarim. And that's the line that's being added in. The handles, the yados of the nedarim are like the nedarim as well. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, if really the Mishnah had that line in, still we have a problem. It starts by saying kol kinoi nedarim kinedarim, and then it says kol the yados nedarim kinedarim. It should have still explained the kinoi of nedarim before it went on to explain the yados of nedarim. The Gemara says, lifresh kinuyim bereisha. It should have still explained the law about kinuyim before it goes to explain the law of yados, because kinuyim was described first. The Gemara says, okay, I'll tell you why. The Gemara says, no, I'm going to teach you something. The Gemara says about the style of the Mishnah in general. The Mishnah starts with, let's say, law A, then goes to law B. The Mishnah will then explain law B before it goes to law A. The one it ends with, that's what it starts with first. So since the Mishnah started with kinuyim and then goes to yados, therefore the Mishnah is first going to explain the laws of yados. And the Mishnah gives us an example. Like we learned in the Sachas Shabbos about the laws about what we're allowed to light, which candles on Shabbos. Bamed madlikin. We say with what fuel can we light? Ubamed ein madlikin. And with what can we not light? And then it states ein madlikin. But it goes into discuss the laws that we cannot, of what we cannot light with. So therefore it goes A, B, and B is explained first. So too the laws of hatman on Shabbos, that you're not allowed to wrap something in heat where it adds on heat. With what do we insulate on Shabbos, and with what are we not allowed to insulate? And then the Gemara, then the Mishnah continues and says, "Uva ein tomnin," and then describes what we do not insulate with. So too, it says, "Bama isha yotza, bama ena yotza." With which jewelry or accessories is a woman allowed to go out into the public domain on Shabbos, and with what is she not allowed to? And then the Mishnah first comes in and explains, "Lo teitze isha," a woman is not allowed to go out with these tachshitim. So the Gemara says, so that's why we go A, B, and then B is explained first. The Gemara says, wait 1 second. You mean to say, wherever the Mishnah starts with A, B, it always explains B first and not A. I'll give you all these examples where it's not the case. But tonight, we're going, to God willing, together we're going to study the Mishnah Baba Basra. Yesh Nochlin Uman Chilin, that there are some people who inherit their relatives who died, and there are some who bequeath to their relatives. And then we go in to say, Nochlin v'lo machilin, and then that's law A, and then there are those who inherit but do not bequeath. And then it says, Nochlin u'machilin, these are the ones who inherit and bequeath. So we go A, B, and then we describe A. And so too, this was the mission we had in Yevamos. Yesh mutaros l'balei and v'asuros l'yevamei. There are some who are permitted to their husbands and prohibited to their Yevamos. And then Shemutarin to their Yavams, Shemutaros l'yevamei and v'asuros l'balei. And then it goes to B. There are some women who are permitted to their Yavam and prohibited to their husbands. And then we go and explain A. And these are the ones who are permitted to their husbands and prohibited to their Yavam. And then we have a third Mishnah. Yesh tu'uno shemen lavona. There are some carbon minchas, there are some grain offerings that require oil and frankincense, and shemen v'lo lavona. And then there are some that require oil but not frankincense. And then our Mishnah comes along to start explaining which are the ones that require oil and frankincense. Goes A, B, and explains A. And so A, B, and back to A. And now Gemara gives another example. We're at the Mishnah also menachos. Yesh tunos hagasha. There are some carbon minchos that require being brought up to the altar. He has to bring the carbon mincha to the southwestern part of the altar. The ein tunos tenufa, and they don't require waving. And tenufa v'lo hagasha, and there are some carbonates that require waving but not being brought close to the altar. And then again, it goes ve'elu tunos hagasha, and these are the ones that require hagasha, and these are the ones that just require bringing close. So therefore, again, it goes A, B, and back to A. And then the Gemara gives one more example. Yesh bechor l'nacho. There are some firstborns that are firstborn with respect to inheriting; they get a double portion. The ein bechor l'kohen, but nevertheless, when it comes to the redemption of the firstborn, they're not going to be considered a Kohen to redeem that, meaning to say that the father has to redeem him from a Kohen. So it could be some firstborn who inherits a double portion, but yet they're not a firstborn to require their father to redeem them from a Kohen. And then the next part says, Bechor l'Kohen ve'ein bechor l'nacho. There are some who are firstborn for a Kohen, but not a firstborn for an inheritance. Ve'ezu bechor l'nacho ve'ein bechor l'Kohen. And then it goes back to law A, who is considered firstborn for Nachla and not a firstborn for a Kohen. So the Gemara says, okay, why do some Mishnahs go A, B, and then explain B, and some Mishnahs go A, B, and then explain A? The Gemara tells us a law. The Gemara says, Halin mishum the avshule mefarishahu the patach beresha. So he says, really, the Mishnah begins to really we're going to say that the most normal way is like our Mishnah does here, A, B, and then B. But these Mishnayos that we listed, which are A, B, and then back to A, it's become mishum the avshule. Because since there's a lot of laws, the Abshule, there's a lot of laws, we would get confused unless we started explaining the one where we started first. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says that who is a wise person? One who answers what is asked first. But here our Gemara is saying no, that you only do that if it's otherwise confusing. Gemara says, but there's a problem with that answer. What does an animal allowed to wear when it goes out on Shabbos? Which accessories? And what is it not allowed to go? Below Avsha, there's not a lot of laws because there's only two laws. With what does it go out? What does it not go out? And the Katani Yotze Gamal, so going back to the previous case, what all those 4 cases like Nochun Manchilin, Nochun Lo Manchilin, Manchilin Lo Nochun, there's a lot of variables, and so therefore the Mishnah first explained the Reisha. Because if we would explain the Seifa first, we would forget the first law of the Reisha. But what about the case of the animal that goes out on Shabbos, where there's not a lot of laws? It says Yotze Gemara, the camel could go out. So the Gemara says Elo Rav Davka. So the Gemara says, okay, Zimnim Mefarish Ahuda Patach Bereisha, Zimnim Ahuda Sarach Mefarish Bereisha. So and this is where we'll stop here. The Gemara says, okay, there's no specific rule. Sometimes it's A, B, and then back to A, and sometimes it's A, B, and then B. So we leave it unresolved. I'm going to take any questions here. We'll stop here.